Hey, welcome back to my channel. I'm Simon Osimo, and in these videos, I share stories from my guests that will educate, inform, and inspire you to live a life of significance. In this video, I'm talking with Ashley Kesner, who is an addiction recovery coach, mental health blogger, founder of Ghost in My Bedroom, and someone who has personally battled depression since the age of 12, which led to several suicide attempts. Now, most recovery programs have an element of faith and religion, but Ashley does not believe in God, but she does believe in the big man who intervened in her life following a suicide attempt, and she will share that experience and describe for us who or what the big man is that helped her on the path to recovery. But before we get into today's content, if you get value from this conversation, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified every time I release a new inspiring video. Now, will you join me as I talk with Ashley Kesner on mental health and addiction recovery?
Thank you so much for having me, Simon. I really appreciate it.
Well, Ashley, I know that you are a bubbly and fun girl, but we're going to be talking about a lot of deep subjects. So I'm really grateful for your time, really appreciative for all the work that you're doing around chemical dependency and mental illness. So, it's an honor for me and a privilege to get to have a conversation with someone like you who's just so open, and there's so much learning for other people.
Sure, absolutely.
And so let's tell my listeners a little bit about who you are. So you are an addiction and recovery coach. You're a mental health blogger and advocate. You're the founder of Free Your Ghost, where you also blog daily for a lot of your social media. And you're a national speaker with the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And you personally have spent the last 20 years battling mental illness, addiction, and depression. And I love your tagline where you say you're badass, or if you don't know this accent, badass. It's really
badass. Yes. Yeah, I don't hold back. I mean, that really is a part of my journey. When I started blogging about my recovery, it was really important for me to keep everything in my voice. And so it is very raw and unfiltered. And my kind of end tagline for everything that I do has been keep kicking ass. So
yeah, and like I said, it's a good catchphrase, but for an Englishman to say ass is quite difficult. It's just like badass. So.
Yeah, I think it sounds cool. So
well, okay, yeah, you can say that. You can say it. But so, like I said, I know it's going to be lighthearted during this conversation, but it's also going to be very deep. And mental illness is something which, in society, I spoke to some friends over the weekend, but it's something that we tend to push away. That either we don't want to admit that it's there, or some people don't know how to actually hold a conversation about it. So my hope and prayer for this conversation is that you'll be able to enlighten people that perhaps struggle with some type of mental illness, or there could be a parent or someone close to someone who's battling mental illness, and they'll listen to your words of wisdom and sort of be inspired by it. So there's a lot for you to live up to here, Ashley.
Hey, this is what I do. So I'm excited. I'm excited to dive in for sure.
It is. So I know I mentioned about Free Your Ghost, which is your sort of blog that you have, and you're just about to sort of start a podcast. So if I may, we'll end on those positive subjects, but I want to sort of draw out from you some knowledge, understanding, and wisdom surrounded when did you first realize that you had a mental illness? And I know doing some research that you said that you had what you described as a wobble when you're age 12, and it was around when you were 16 that you realized you had a sort of depressive disorder. So maybe if you don't mind, tell us about that chapter in your life.
Sure. So yeah, I was about 12 years old that I remember going to my parents and saying, I don't feel right. I'm crying for no reason. I have no idea how to explain it. I feel down, not as happy as I feel like I should be. They kind of chalked it up to, oh, you're growing, you're a teen, you're developing your emotions. But for me, it felt much more than that. And it was that early. It was at 12 years old. I kind of stuck with it, and we just, trudged through it, some of those episodes that I had, until it was high school that it became a little worse, and actually those irrational thoughts and everything else. And one comment from someone while I was a cheerleader, one comment she had said, you're getting too heavy to put up. And I was a butterfly. I'm very small, by the way. I'm only 5'2", like
5'2" tiny.
So at that point, though, I was about 130 pounds, lots of muscle. I was a competition cheerleader. Still struggling with some of those emotions, but for the most part, I was a really happy kid. But that one comment threw me through a loop, which developed into an eating disorder, full-blown bulimia and anorexia, and irrational thoughts. Very, very severe irrational thoughts. My parents had then decided to take me to a psychiatrist, and it was here that I was officially diagnosed with the eating disorder and major depressive disorder or depression.
Yeah, and I know, looking back, you say from sort of 12 years old, is there anything you now, I believe you're in your 30s, you should never ask a woman her age, but was that online?
I'm proud of it. I'm 33.
33, okay. Oh, yeah. I see you're still in your prime, you're still a youngster, but so what does that look like at 12 then? Today's world, everything is on social media. There's so much information out there on you could Google YouTube. I'm sure hundreds and thousands of videos might come up. But at 12 years old for you, in what way were you feeling different? Have you been able to contextualize the emotions, the feelings, the words that you might have been saying that were saying to you that all isn't well in my mind?
Sure. I mean, I'll try my best. I want you to remember that you are talking to a recovering alcoholic. So I did drink away a lot of those brain cells. And I sometimes joke about things, and you'll kind of get that vibe. And the more you look at my story, that's my approach to it. I always say I am cynical, not clinical, but I did drink some of those brain cells away. But if I were to describe it and how I remember it that young, very similar to how I felt as an adult. Just periods of almost emptiness, periods of doubt. After I went to my parents and kind of told them, I don't know why I feel this way. I'm crying, but I don't have a reason. That frustration is hard to manage alone, because you can't accept it. You can't accept that there's no trigger. There's no reason to cause some of these things. And that's a giant struggle with depression and what causes that shame and guilt. And then on top of it, then I went to my parents, and, they were like, well, it's okay. You're just growing. They kind of, they didn't know themselves how to handle it. There wasn't that mental health awareness back then. So they kind of just shoved it under the rug and left me kind of to feel there's something wrong with me, Yeah,
and I know and that's really fascinating stuff to hear, even so young, to work out, why do I feel different than perhaps other people should do, or just recognizing that, all isn't right. Because I've got to admit, for me in my life, I often try and think, well, what must it be like? And it's really hard for me to contextualize how someone else is feeling. So yes, it's interesting. I know one of the things that I read about you is that your mum, during your sort of anorexia and bulimic stages, your mum found a bag of sick sort of hidden within your room when she was cleaning one day. I mean, yes. How was it for your parents during this stage?
My parents, like I said, mental health awareness was just kind of it's definitely not where it is today. They didn't know how to handle it. They were scared. They were terrified. I mean, when you go into your daughter's room and you find a bag of vomit, how do you think, you can't really put yourself in those shoes. So they confronted me, and I can still remember specifically that day that I came home, and my mom said, I found this, Ashley. Are you okay? And unknown to me now at the time, unknown then, my brother I have a younger brother, Jay, who had gone to my parents and have said, Ashley's struggling. You need to get her help. And they didn't know how, so they didn't. but that was a real challenge, and I can't imagine how they would feel in that moment. But it's something that, we've talked about often now, how I would handle it, especially as a mother, because I am one. And, just to try to help them understand what I was going through too. That's really what it comes down to, is trying to empathize with somebody else, and especially your kids. And I know you want to talk about that, so I'll save it. But really, empathy is huge. And I know it's hard to understand some of those things when our kids are going through them, but there is a way to do it. And I advocate it, and I help parents all the time with them.
Yeah, it must be difficult for parents to be in that position. And what about you at that young age? Was there anyone that you felt you could share that with, family, friends, or was it just something even at a young age you knew to sort of keep this internal?
So there were a few of my friends that knew I was doing it, and it's because they were doing it too. I'm not sure, their reasons. I can't speak for them. I know my reasons, and it was a coping tool looking back. But I also, an eating disorder is a whole different realm than mental illness. It's something that I still struggle with. I always say it's kind of, like a shitty roommate. You just have to get used to living with. But, there are certain habits and everything else, but there were people that knew because they were doing it themselves. Yeah. And I guess that's why I didn't feel alone and didn't feel like I was really doing anything too harmful, unfortunately.
And so we go from, sort of 16 years old, and then we sort of fast forward to when you went to college. But those in between years, would you just say that it was a battle with an eating disorder, or sort of some other addictions and mental illness sort of played in there? What would you say between maybe 16 and sort of 18, 19 when you went to college?
Depression was and is, the root of everything that I've had to deal with. And I firmly believe that, looking back now. I mean, an eating disorder is kind of a different realm, and there are certain things that I still have to watch and be careful of, but I'm more self-aware of those things treating my depression. But I really feel that my depression, anxiety issues were always kind of the stem and the root of everything. Once I started to treat those, then is when my life got a hell of a lot better.
Yeah, I'm sure. And there was times when you went to college. I know that you said that, I think I read one of your blogs somewhere, that you didn't have boundaries of a home or a small town. It obviously, any teenager going away for college, it gives you more freedom to do those things where there's no controls or no one's saying, no, you shouldn't be doing this. But interestingly, you'd weaned yourself off medication at that point. Was that because you felt that you were getting sort of well, or were you weaning yourself off just because you didn't want to take the medication anymore? What have you sort of rationalized about that, looking back at it afterwards?
Sure, absolutely. Looking back, I felt like I had reached a stable place. But now, looking back, I also hadn't fully accepted my diagnosis. I didn't fully accept and could take that I would have to be on medication for the rest of my life just to be happy. I didn't want to have to take a pill just to be happy. I thought, I let my pride and my ego get the best of me, and decided to wean myself off of it. And then, that's kind of when alcohol became more of an influence and more prominent in my life to cope with some of the things I was feeling.
Yeah, and I don't think I actually asked you this or read about. What's your degree in, Ashley? What are you actually studying for?
Oh, that's a whole other story in itself.
We've got all day. We've got time. Let's go.
Yeah. So actually, when I went into college, I was really interested in becoming a physician's assistant. That had kind of transitioned. I really, really loved chemistry. So I went as a chemistry major. I did a couple of years, and I think I got burnt out too with that, which, drinking, cure all. But I ended up switching, going in and out and withdrawing so many times during the course of my career because of alcohol. I ended up leaving at one point, and I found myself in kind of the financial sector, and was when I got into banking and really enjoyed that. Because I had so many chemistry credits, though, I decided to keep those. So my degree is in integrative studies, which is a combination of sociology and chemistry credits. So I know it's incredibly well-rounded. And then I also took a minor in business administration in the event that I would ever want to go back and pursue my MBA.
Wow. So
I know it's heavy.
No, it's some good stuff in there. Good stuff. Were you able to? I don't know if there is like a sort of a true term, but were you like a functioning sort of alcoholic or a functioning drinker? Could you go to classes, get the grades, and maintain your sort of separate lifestyle on the side? What did that look like for you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I would go out. Looking back, it was a lot different too when I was younger. The healing time after drinking was much shorter than it, is when you're older. And I think a lot of people can agree with that. But I would drink and then go to class the next day. Eventually, though, my drinking was so severe that I was skipping class and I wasn't going. And then I would get to the point where I just didn't care and would withdraw. And I ended up doing that probably 6 or 7 times.
Yeah, and I think one of the topics I'd like to touch on just about is sort of crossover between, maybe being a teenager and then going into higher education. Is there an age, and I generally don't know the answer to this, is there an age where you do you age out of some of the eating disorder and you moved into sort of drinking? Was there a crossover, or did the sort of bulimia stop and then drinking took up? And the reason why I say that is generally those that have an addiction, if they cure it in one area of their life, it can spill over sort of somewhere else. So I wasn't too sure if your bulimia carried on into college or whether it's just got replaced with alcohol.
Yeah, like I said, so an eating disorder I consider it an entirely separate thing. I have struggled off and on with that since the age of 16. It has never fully gone away. I still have, to some degree, a little bit self-conscious about myself. I'm much happier and comfortable now, but there are certain things that I just have to be aware of. But it's always kind of been in the back of my mind. And I really I know I hate to say this, but I just think it's more prominent in females to feel that way because of society pressures to be a certain way. I think drinking helped cope with the eating disorder. So, I may not have been actively purging all the time, but those thoughts of being self-conscious and insecurity were still there. So I was drinking and getting that faux sense of confidence about myself, and I loved it. And so that's why I kept drinking, because it broke me out of my shell. It got me out of that insecurity. When I committed to sobriety and everything else and treated the depression, I had to actively work on getting rid of some of these little habits that I've had. And my blog does touch on that. Some things that I didn't like about myself and I wanted to work on, which was pinching. I used to pinch myself in all areas of my body constantly. And, I think one day I started counting it. One day over 300 times I pinched myself. Now I don't at all. And I really firmly believe that it just all comes down to mindset and treating what I had to treat from the beginning. And that was my depression.
Yeah, it seems even from a young age, you've had a lot of self-awareness. Like I said, to recognize this from 12 and moving into sort of teenage years. And I think around this time was when you'd actually told a friend for the first time that you didn't want to live. I mean, can you remember that stage? What was the build up to that?
Yeah, so I was drinking heavily, and I believe that was about I think I was about 21 or 22. I was drinking heavily, and I told him that I just couldn't do it anymore. I had reached such a terrible, dark place. I think, a relationship just ended or something like that. I had no self-worth, no self-love to pick myself back up. So to cope with all of that, I was drinking, and I felt alone. I felt like I didn't have anybody to talk to. I remember I had the pill sitting right in front of me, and I told my friend, I said, I don't want to do this. And he rushed over and called my mom, and I was living about an hour away. She came in and took me into the doctor, and that's when I went in for my first inpatient experience.
Yeah, and I mean, are you still in touch with that friend now, that person that was there for that first moment?
I just talked to him this morning. Yes.
And the reason why I ask that is generally you find there's just such a strong connection, such a strong bond through that, and it's at the time you felt that you're alone, and that there was no one there for you, and obviously there was this friend that was there, and I don't know how many years ago this was, but years later that person's still there for you, and at this time is, do you, when you look back, was there anything that you could have done differently around that time, particularly for yourself?
I think I could have probably been more open and honest with my parents about what was going on. But a large part of my story, and I just want to say that my parents are wonderful. They have provided me with such a great life. I don't blame them or fault them for anything of how they reacted to things or how they handled situations. I think that honestly, it was just they didn't know what to do. But from getting so much invalidation, from going to them and trying to tell them, this is how I feel, and getting back this, you're just being too emotional. There's a lot, just try to think about all the other people that have it worse. You'll get over it. You'll look back and think this is nothing one day. It prevented me from ever wanting to go and say how I felt. And I think that's a major issue in society still. And it's something that I advocate against all the time. Is, it's called toxic positivity, that overgeneralization that you have to always be positive all the time. I try not to jump down people's throat when they come at me and say, stay positive, Ashley. But it is harmful, and it's counterproductive to the entire thing, because, we don't have to be happy all the time, and we need to have a safe place that we can go and talk to others and let them know how we're actually really feeling, and we need to be heard.
Yeah, I personally feel, I was a police officer for 14 years in England. I've seen a lot of things that no person should really have to see. And as police officers, no matter where you are in the world, you convince yourself this is normal, and it's not normal. And I think it's okay to have those moments, but it's very difficult to really open up and sort of share those emotions and feelings. There is that fear of judgment, and are you not tough enough? Can you not deal with this?
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to hear you say that. And I guess if we sort of move on to the period around when there was a period that you were sort of cutting yourself, which I guess is that sort of just escalation of different behaviours, is just manifesting its way out in a different form. Is there any sort of key learning that you learned about yourself, Ashley, when you were cutting yourself?
I don't know if I necessarily learned anything productive. I learned that when I'm in my dark moments, I have a lot of courage, and it's not the good courage. And I think that, I've always just felt that I feel things on a different emotional level. I think my EQ is really kind of off the charts, the self-awareness, the emotional sense. But I think because I have always felt that I feel things more deeply and am a very emotional person, that, when I wasn't getting relief from the drinking, when I wasn't getting relief from the purging, I knew that I didn't want to kill myself. When my self-harming was really bad, I was still raising my daughter. She's the light of my life, and she always was. Me doing these things, a lot of people go, I can't believe she was doing that with her, as a mom. But you have to understand that it's not selfish. I hated myself. but I knew that I had to stay here for her. And so I didn't want to die, but my release was to cut myself. And then eventually, that didn't last long, and it turned into an attempt to take my life.
Yeah, and Ashley, I mean, that's a great segue into it. Do you mind sharing those sort of the events surrounding how you tried to take your life? And I know you ended into an outpatient facility, which really where your transformation started. So, please share as deeply as you want to on that subject.
Sure. So I had gotten to a really severe place. I think it was I believe it was 14 years, of coping with drinking. And it had become really overwhelming. And I was ashamed of my habits. I hid a lot of it. But there were people that knew when I was drinking, especially my daughter's father. I was miserable. And when someone's miserable, they try to make everybody else miserable. And I don't really think we think about that. We project how we feel onto other people all the time. So if you're not happy with yourself, you're not going to be happy with others. And I never was with him. And when I was drinking, I would nitpick. And, when it got really bad, was when he was deployed overseas in Poland. He's an amazing person. He's, staff sergeant in the National Guard, serves our country. Here he is over there, and here I am kind of only thinking about myself. And I recognize now how terrible and excruciating that must have been for him, not only to be away from his daughter, but to have to kind of put up with my crap. So, there was a lot that we had to work through there too, but it was when he was deployed that I say I was working 4 full-time jobs. I was a full-time single mom. I was working full-time until I ended up quitting my job because I feel like, it was a lot. I was in school again full-time, trying for the umpteenth time to finish my degree. And I was a full-blown alcoholic. My life I was a robot. I was going through the motions. I hated everything about myself. I couldn't stand to look in the mirror. And, it got to the point where, and it's really hard to, and I'm sorry, I still get emotional about it.
It's okay.
I can't put into words what it feels like to feel that empty, that worthless. My brain had just told me, you need to save everyone from yourself and end this. I didn't want anyone else to be hurt by my destruction. And it was almost a no-brainer. I had dropped my daughter off at my parents' house. I went home and I remember I drank myself to death so I could numb, and I tried to overdose. I don't remember reaching out to the few people that I did, but apparently something in my brain said to do it. And one of them called crisis, and they came to my house and were able to get in, and I was taken to the ER. And I woke up really kind of out of it. And actually I remember waking up being really discouraged with my mom next to me. And I said, just have them let me die, please. But of course they didn't. And I was able to get testing done and everything else. And I ended up going into inpatient then for the second hospitalization. And I was 31 years old. This really isn't that long ago, which is another kind of unique part to the story. But I went into inpatient and just feeling so ashamed, so guilty, so worthless. I couldn't believe that I had ended up in the same place again. But I knew that it was time. It was time to free what was haunting me. And that was my drinking and a lot of different stuff. I did inpatient and I found the big book. I wasn't doing much in there. There's not much to do other than
a lot of reading.
A lot of reading.
Well, I guess you had two options. It was going to be prison or in hospital, wasn't it? So I think you chose the better one, to be fair, Ashley.
Yeah. So, I hadn't done anything that, was going to end me up in jail. So, but they had given me the choice. They said, we're going to force you to go in inpatient. You could sign yourself in. And I said, I'll gladly go in. I need it. That really was a life-changing point for me. I had a lot of growth within 1 week, which is intense. And it was because I found the big book and I started reading it. And there's a section in the middle that is for people that are unsure about their drinking habits. They don't want to call themselves an alcoholic, all of that stuff. And I actually don't prefer labels. I don't use them. But for the context of this, I'm going to talk about it. But there's a portion in the middle, and it goes into talking about a single mom. There's a story about a single mom. And I just remember breaking down and going, this is it. It's me. I have a problem. And yeah.
I was going to say, it was fascinating because when we spoke, I think you were saying, you're 31, I think you said at this point. Mm-hmm. That was the first time you've actually really said to yourself, I do have a problem. And sort of, were you perhaps, I don't know, kidding yourself in denial? Why was it at sort of 31 there you can say, actually, this is real? What allowed you to have that level of openness and honesty with yourself? Because people think Simon's great. No one really knows me because we're very good at hiding ourselves within. But for you to actually admit to yourself, maybe I'm not so good right now. How did you get there?
I hit rock bottom. Sometimes, unfortunately, that's what has to happen as a wake-up call. This was my second inpatient hospitalization. I couldn't believe that I had ended up there. I knew my drinking was out of control. So to some degree, I did know that I had a problem with it. I just didn't want to admit it because I thought that it would make me not normal. I don't know. I was worried about what everybody else would think. The idea of, having to go to AA and all of this stuff just was terrifying. It's scary. It's really, really scary. But my parents knew, and I started telling my friends. And, it did start to become real. And I was able to accept it, I think, to a certain degree, but really not fully until after I had hiccuped, I call it. I had a relapse in April, and that was my nail in the coffin.
Yeah, and I'm just staying on about sort of being in hospital for a second, and you sort of hitting rock bottom. With those, there's a sort of common statement that people say, if you knew the real Simon, no one would like me. I mean, is that where you were? But, if people knew the real you, you didn't want to turn because you'd be embarrassed and feel shame. Can you relate to that statement that people often say?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know who the hell I was. I don't even know. My drinking had just completely depleted any of my self-worth. In order to be anything, I felt like I had to be drunk to talk to anyone, to have a conversation. I was terrified. I was insecure. I was a shell. And I was scared to admit it to anyone. So that's why what I do right now is really important to me, to help people not get to that point and help them understand that they're not alone at all. I think that it's a complete blessing looking back that my brain is rewired a little bit different. And there's a lot of important factors into it too. You know, on my dad's side of the family, alcoholism runs in that side. Those are things that I don't think were discussed often enough growing up, about how substance use could come into play in my life to cope with things. But again, I don't fault any of that, because I feel like my path, I was supposed to take it and live it for a very specific reason. And right now, I'm grateful. I'm very grateful that I experienced it and had to go through the worst so that I could find my best.
Yeah, and I think with all the things that you've just described, and you getting emotional telling your journey. I was getting emotional. There's tears coming in my eyes. Like, I don't know when I'm going. How can I discreetly just wipe my eyes? It doesn't look like I'm crying here, but I follow all your social media. I think the last one was Twitter that me and you connected the other day. But you're always posting so much powerful stuff, which is just helping thousands of people, not only across the country, across the world. So you've got to take a lot of comfort with how your journey is helping and shaping others. So I'm really grateful for you being vulnerable and sharing that. And it's actually a good segue, Ashley, into your transformation now as to where you are now. We know you're an advocate. You present on mental illness. You've got your blog about your personal journey. You're gaining a huge following on all the platforms that you're on. You describe him, and I'm a man of faith, but you describe it as the big guy. And when we were talking about this, I was like, we're going to get into this because it's important. I think whatever people believe, I think it's good to have some type of belief. You don't have to believe in Christ. You don't have to believe in Buddhism, anything. It's just good to believe in something, but there is a higher power controlling us. So I want to dive in now tell us a story that built up to it and then sort of tied into the big man that you got connected to.
Yeah, me and the big man are tight. We're best friends now. I definitely believe, and you can see this on basically any of my stuff, that spirituality is a personal choice. I think it's a progressive journey. I was not, I didn't have any sort of connectedness when I first started this. But I've had two very specific spiritual awakenings that brought me to my knees in tears and have helped me develop into the person that I am now. And it's just really unique that, it did happen and is happening so quickly. But where I felt it the most was, when I came out of inpatient and I was dedicated to getting sober. I had tried to go to AA, but there was just something that I did not like about AA. I didn't like saying an affirmation of my biggest flaw. I didn't like going in there and saying, "Hi, I'm Ashley, I'm an alcoholic." A lot of different factors, and that's just based on where I'm from. There was a generational gap there. I was a 30-year-old sitting in a room with 60 years old and older. I think one time someone said they were 91 or something. I mean, How do you relate to someone like that? But there were times where I felt belittled. I remember, all of that. But so when I went into AA and I was doing all this unsuccessfully on my own, I would get sober. I'd be sober for a couple weeks and then I'd go back. And because I kept failing, here, insert shame and guilt again. And this is where I found myself in the worst depressive episode of my lifetime. And my daughter's father had rightfully taken her at that point because I could not take care of myself. But I was in bed for weeks and I wasn't eating or bathing. And I was laying there just with no will to live. And I knew I had two choices. It was start over or try again and take my life. And something told me that, and I can't put it into words because it is a different feeling. And I don't think that it should be described or be able to be articulated, but something higher than me said, you got to get out of this bed and you got to get it out. And that's when I wrote the breakup letter, which was my letter to alcohol, breaking up with it, kind of just like a toxic relationship. So that's what it is. I wrote the breakup letter and I posted it to my Facebook wall for all of my friends and family to read. I did this to keep myself accountable this one last time to my sobriety. And I can't tell you how absolutely stressful that was and anxiety ridden, but I didn't get criticism. I didn't get anything other than love and support. And it's still really, it's humbling, and it's why I believe in the power of vulnerability and just being fully honest with yourself. And as I continued to write, more people continued to read, and the stories started flooding in, and people were able to relate to it. I'm very raw and unfiltered. Again, it's explicit, but that's just me. But it's helped me really discover and dive into the uncomfortable. I got sober and decided to get sober on the brink of a global pandemic. So add in a whole other layer to this. So if anyone's out there listening and got sober, during all of this shit show of a world, props to you, because it was a whole different ball game, because you don't have the opportunity to go outside. You don't have the opportunity to go to groups. You don't have the opportunity to go do anything. I was stuck, confined to my house, where I've spent miserable nights drinking myself to death. But I look at it as a silver lining. It forced me to really dive into some hard stuff. And from sharing every single detail, I can honestly say that every single detail of my life is out there for anyone to read. And because of that, I am able to be completely and authentically me at all times. I have absolutely nothing to hide, and I have zero shame in my story and zero shame of what I've gone through. And that's why I continue to live the way I do and speak the way I speak, because it's worth it. It's badass.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because a quote from Socrates was coming to my mind. And I think he once said that the best way to live with honor in this life is to be who we pretend to be. I think as you talk in one of a prior episode, I can't remember the number, with Lewis Conway Jr., he was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. When he was released, he found he used to try and hide it, and everything was about trying to hide his former life. And very similar to you, it was only when he became vulnerable and very transparent that actually freed him from that burden. He's very similar to you. He's inspiring people around the world through his story. So fascinating journey. And to go back to the big man, we don't know who or what he is for you, when everyone is different, but you felt this sort of movement, I guess, in a sort of forward trajectory. So I'm going to ask you a challenging question surrounding this, and there's no right or wrong answer. Just to say, it's not a test. I'm just looking for your perception of it. So how you feel, because I know you'll tell people off, so that's why I gave you the warning. So when we look at it, I do very simply, people often say, well, come on, drag yourself out of it, pull yourself out of it. And we know that it has to come from within. So knowing that you felt some type of power that sort of helped you, how do other people find that? Is that something that found you, something that you were looking for? To sort of see where I'm going with it. When people are trying to get away from addiction and they're trying to find it within, it sounds like you found it from a sort of an outward source. So can you rationalize with what I'm saying, or contextualize that question? So it's a deep and weird one, but I'd be interested to see what you'd say about that.
Oh yeah, deep is my thing. Let's do this. Yeah. So I really didn't have, I am the type of person, and I'm just going to be straight on honest right now. I do not believe in religion, but I do believe in a higher power. So, I'm not a churchgoer or anything like this, but am very connected at this point. I wasn't in the beginning, but in order for me to get through certain things, I knew I would pray. I didn't know what I was praying to, but I would just pray. And I knew that the big man got me out of bed that day. So I knew that, there was something there more than me. As I continued on, there were pockets of moments where I knew that what was happening in my life was something much bigger than me. I do say it's a progressive journey. It requires a very, very open mind and heart at all possible times, which is something that I think people struggle with in particular. But my first kind of enlightening that I had was after my relapse. And I had gone back to the blog and I told my world that I struggled again. They lifted me up. And that was kind of, a sign of the beauty of and power behind something more. But I started the next day, and I remember, I think it was probably 2 months in then from that point, waking up in the morning. And even when I talk about it, it makes me cry. I remember waking up in the morning and just feeling so alive and grateful. And I remember just crying outside. I was going for a jog, and it was like the air felt different. I could smell better. It was like all of my senses were extremely heightened. And I just broke into tears. And there was no other explanation for me. Besides, the big man telling me, you're on the right track, keep going. And then the second one was, not too long ago, amongst all of this political stuff going on in the world. And, I'm sitting here just going, I don't understand. I don't understand how people can be so focused on these, kind of useless topics. They're not useless, but I broke into kind of tears again and felt this overwhelming sensation of, this is bigger than you. This is so much bigger than you. What you are doing by sharing your story and showing that you can literally make it through the depths of hell and come out on the other side laughing and smiling. This is why you had to go through everything that you did to now help others. I feel like I see things from a higher, almost macro level. My anxiety is decreased almost. It's very, very hard to articulate how, when you are connected to something more than yourself and you genuinely feel like you're living with it through you. I don't think it can really be something that's described. And I really honestly kind of choose not to.
Yeah, it's great. And the other tough question I've got for you, and again, I really believe your transparency and openness, and to break down all those barriers is really, really helping you. Do you believe, or have you ever considered, was the big man always there knocking at your door and you didn't let him in? Or do you think this was like an intervention from the big man? I guess there's two different ways to look at it. Where would you say you sit?
I believe that he was always present in my life. I have chosen to not resent him for putting me through the garbage that he did, but I now look back and know that it was for a reason. And that's why I'm able to appreciate where I am now. I think that I was very closed down and there was something more than me, not in that sense, but in the darker sense, trying to take its hold. And I'm just very glad that I didn't let it.
Yeah, and it's very powerful. I mean, like I say, I'm outwardly a Christian. I don't try and hide it from everyone, from anyone, but I don't. I respect other people's views and opinions. I think the commonality for a lot of this is there is something out there. Whether you're like me, you believe in God, whether it's like you, but you believe in this sort of, divineness, this big guy. I just think it's good that people believe to try and make sense of what this world is and to have faith and to have hope. So I'm really grateful that you're there. And we're going to start moving on to some of your blog and some of the good stuff now, because I can't make you cry 3 times in one episode. I've never had that before.
Oh my gosh, listen, I always say, my grandma always said, we girls have our bladder behind our eyes. So that's my excuse. I've embraced the fact that I'm emotional. I don't even care anymore. That's
good. That's good. That is good. I like that. So one of the things where I feel, and I know you do a lot of podcasts and you talk to a lot of people, and I was trying to think, well, what's a unique way to sort of really help others? And there's some very interesting topics which come about to the post-addiction, where I feel that you can offer some insight and just remind people that this struggle is still real. And one of those is that me and you had, I don't know if it was a LinkedIn or email conversation, where I have to be honest, I'm a former investigator. I see men respond to your comments because they see you as being vulnerable, your life is out there. Maybe tell us about some of the struggles that you have now, because maybe some of those struggles actually are slightly different. You've got to keep the other crazy people away. So tell us a bit about that. Because that's great learning. So a lot of people, I bet, don't expect or know that you really have that type of challenge now.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, something that I've always kind of been challenged in my life, and I don't say this to sound like a pompous asshole or anything. I know that I'm an attractive female. Something I've always been challenged with is having people, or men especially, reach out to me and say inappropriate things, always commenting on my looks. When I got vulnerable about my story, it got worse. I don't know why that's the case. When someone is able, I think, it really is a true testament. When someone is able to be truly vulnerable and be truly themselves, it attracts others, because I think, it shows others, well, I want to be that way. I want to do that. There are men that don't understand boundaries and everything like that. And it's a serious issue. And I've talked to a lot of other females on, especially the professional platforms, of how things aren't appropriate. The pet names and everything else. I'm not okay with that. And I call them out on it. Either that or you just block and report. I mean, the buttons are there for a reason. How I handle things like that is probably different than most, and what they probably don't expect. I think society kind of expects us as females to accept this behavior and just move on from it. I challenge that and say, no way. We are about, I'm all for equality and full respect, but yeah, I still get some people that are, inappropriate. And I do. Sometimes you'll see that I will make posts about it.
Oh yeah, I've seen you say that. That's why I wanted to mention it.
And remind them of how to act. I'm not sure how they think that's okay, but I'm not scared to Photoshop their head on a meme and blast my world with it, so they should be aware.
As a warning there. But part of the reason I wanted to cover that, because one, like I said, you're coming out the other side of sort of vulnerability, and there's people that are sort of maybe exploiting it is too strong a word, but there's people that maybe taking advantage of it. But it also ties in with any addiction and like-minded behaviors. You've got to say goodbye to former lives. I mean, there must have been, I'm thinking now, for a parent listening to this, or someone who could have been going through a battle, that's saying goodbye. I'm never going to drink again. I'm never going to do this again. That must be a hard thing. close friends that used to enable you, that you would drink with, that you perhaps do drugs with, that you've had to just say, you can't be in my life because you're no longer a positive role model?
Honestly, because my situation was unique and because I did things the way that I did, and I am from a small town, when I told everybody and put this post out there that said, hey, this is my issue, my friends that were the heavy drinkers, and some still are, they were actually the ones that gave me the most support. Which you wouldn't think that. Sometimes it's not the case, but they understood. And I think they understand because they just haven't fully accepted some of the things themselves. But they support me. And those that haven't supported me, I just really have chosen to move forward without them, because life is too short to deal with assholes. But it is a challenge. It is a challenge to kind of change your environment. How I did things and, choosing to be so vulnerable, it changed my friend base and everything like that, and who I surrounded myself with. But it also helped me gain an entirely other circle that is full of some of the most compassionate and loving people I've ever met in my life. And so for that, I'm thankful.
Yeah, there's a real community, isn't there, around this stuff. Even for me doing my podcast, I really, most of the people that I interview, they do become friends, just not just acquaintances, they become friends, and you email back and forth and talk to. So that support is really there. Just one last question before we move on to about sort of ghost in your bedroom type stuff, and tell us about the blog and the good stuff you're doing every day. Is how did you have to sort of either rebuild a relationship with your daughter or with family members? I imagine there must have been a lot of years of strain there if you've been in around sort of addiction and mental illness. What can you say about that time in your life, trying to rebuild relationships with family members and your daughter?
My daughter is only 3. So when I was going through things, she was very unaware. And that was actually, it is kind of a blessing. She didn't know what was happening. So there wasn't, I'm still her mom, and she probably will not remember my struggles, which is something, that is good about the situation. Now, in terms of myself, sometimes I still have a hard time forgiving myself for where I was when she was so little, because I can't get that time back. But I choose to focus on the now and what I'm doing moving forward. So what I can build for her, is a legacy that, not only myself that can be remembered by, but for her as well. I had to really build up a lot with my daughter's father. Like I said, he's a military guy. He's strong, protective. We went through our hell together with this. Really, it takes time. It takes time. He needed proof. I'm doing that for him. However, a large part of sobriety is you need to be sober for yourself, not for other people, or else you will falter. I live now to impress nobody else but myself, which I think is the way that it should be handled. But making amends is very challenging. I've pretty much made all of mine. There are still people left that I haven't reached out to. And there are people that I've reached out to multiple times and have tried to explain my situation and everything else, and where I was and why I got to the place that I did. And they have chosen not to forgive me. That can be stressful in itself. But you have to remember that if you are constantly making changes to better your life, you are constantly, doing that moving forward, that lack of forgiveness shows more about them than it ever will me. And that's how I view it. So.
Yeah, powerful stuff. And as we start to sort of wrap up our time together, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, your blog. So, Free Your Ghost is the name of the blog. Is that correct?
No, so I know this is tricky because it's all kind of, it's all, I know,
business advice.
I know, right? So Ghost in My Bedroom is the blog itself.
Okay.
And then as that developed and I found out that my purpose was in fact, to help others who have gone through similar things as myself, I had always used the hashtag Free Your Ghost on everything. I took that hashtag and developed it into my own company now, which is Free Your Ghost, and is where I offer the addiction recovery coaching. I received my certification as a peer support specialist. It's an emerging field in the social services arena. They're specific people. They're very similar to therapists. We have to have certification, but you must self-identify with a mental illness or prior addiction. And it makes it very unique for me because it helps me relate to the people I'm working with. It's a whole other level of empathy. And I think I'm pretty good at it. I don't know.
Well, here's one thing I'd say. You've definitely got a good resume for it.
Yeah, right?
I can't, you weren't selling your qualification, but you were telling the listeners about your qualification. I was like, never mind that, bollocks to that.
Yeah.
Look at the experience you've got. You've got the lifestyle. I don't want a piece of paper. I want someone like you that's been done it and got a t-shirt.
Absolutely. It's almost like, my degree was something that I finished, just recently, which was amazing. I finished my bachelor's degree and finally graduated after working on it for 13 years. And then,
congratulations.
Thank you. And, it's funny, it was such a personal achievement, but when it comes to this stuff, when it comes to everything that I've gone through and helping others now moving forward, my life experience means way more. The degree is nice to have and show a piece of paper, but my life experience is what helped me and continues to help me, building me into the person that I am and moving forward.
Yeah, so I've just got a couple of questions as we wrap up then, so we can, we're going to come quick fire, but take your time and answer them. So we've covered a lot of ground from when you're 12 years old and having the wobble to 16, battling sort of anorexia, being bulimic, mental illness, suicide. There's a lot here, Ashley, now, isn't there?
Seriously, listen, I know my story.
Kind of a lie down.
Yeah.
So I guess you throw all that stuff together. If there's, getting back to sort of being serious now, if there's a parent listening to some of this and they might have seen a red flag, a small behavior, something that you said might have resonated, thinking that could be my son or daughter, what's the best advice throughout your life experience that you could give to a parent now that might be in and around situations that you've experienced?
It's really funny that you asked me this because I'm actually developing a course for this right now, and it's being released soon. It's called Empathy Made Easy. One of the challenges I think we face as a parent, and I know my parents have faced, is the ability to relate to a child because we have so many responsibilities happening in our life, and when our kid comes to us with something going on in their life, it can seem very small, because we're comparing it, with all of our stuff up here and our child's down here. So, for an example, when a child comes to us as an adult and say someone called them a name at school and they're very upset, their whole life is crumbling down and they're telling you that. From me, my advice to you in that situation, the worst thing you could do is laugh. I'm telling you right now. It can be difficult too. It's hard for me not to laugh at my 3-year-old. But you have to figure that's where they are in their life. They don't have all of these other responsibilities that we have. So this is their life right there. And it is soul crushing. So say the kid comes home and, they're a wreck. They're, just life is over kind of deal because this kid called him a name at school. The best thing you can do is sit them down, acknowledge how they feel, and relate to them. And this is an opportunity for the parent to be vulnerable too. So, just for example, if I was to do it, I'd sit down and say, I'm really sorry this happened to you. I would try to pinpoint some of the emotions that child's probably feeling, and or relate to them of a time where it's happened to me, because Lord knows I've been called lots of names in my lifetime. But I would sit them down and say, I remember someone calling me a name in school too, and I remember how that made me feel. And I just want you to know I'm here for you. What can I do to support you right now? The invalidation, the whole stay positive and you'll get over it, and you're being too emotional, that's causing damage. And that will eventually turn your kid off from wanting to come from you. And the whole idea and what we need to do is make them feel safe to come to us. So empathy is extremely important. And that's something that I talk to parents often about. You got to meet your kid where they are. You have to. You got to make them feel safe so that they can come to you. And when they do have bigger issues, that way you can handle it appropriately, and they know they can talk to you. So that's what I always say. Try not to relate to their situation specifically. I always encourage parents to pinpoint some of those emotions. Does your kid seem mad, frustrated, lonely, angry? You've felt that in your lifetime. Get on their level. Relate to a time where you felt lonely, angry, frustrated. Talk to them about it. Suggest how or explain how you got over it. And then, ask them, encourage them, point out their strengths, and leave them in this wonderful, empowered place. Because the best thing we can do is build our kids up in their confidence and their love for themselves, so that they can move forward in life and be able to tackle things on their own.
Well, and that's great advice. I was sat there listening, thinking I should be doing all that with my kids, but how bad am I? But I will commit to trying. My wife is she's the stronghold in that area, but I listen to advice, sound advice. I will commit to trying for sure. So let's flip the question. And this is a hypothetical one, but what is the type of advice that might have got you to a place of sanctuary sooner? So you've had this battle for your entire life. What advice could someone have given you to have got you here sooner?
I don't know, because I was given it so many times. I was told, I think you have a problem. You need to stop drinking. You're drinking too much. I don't know what could have helped. I really don't know. I think that what's happening now, though, in the world, the recovery presence, more people coming out, being proud of their sobriety. I think that's probably something that I wish I would have seen back then. But there really is nothing that I would change about any of it, to be quite honest. Because, again, it's gotten to me where I was, where I am now, and has helped me to relate to others in their situation. So my perspective is, I can only use what I've gone through to be more vocal about it and show that other people do not have to be ashamed of what they're feeling or what they're going through, and to know that they have a place that they can safely talk about it with me. And it's working. I add humor into my efforts, which I think makes it 10 times better. But, that's the other part of it. I think everything, the mental health awareness sometimes is just too serious. I firmly believe that. I think when you do add humor into it, and it makes it more relatable. But I have a lot of people reaching out to me now, so I can only try to do my best and keep doing what I'm doing and make it bigger. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm writing my book, and I'm just going to keep pushing for bigger.
Well, and again, that's great advice that you've given, and it is that inward reflection and just keep walking forward. So I'm proud as to where you are. So I guess the last question, let's end on a real high then. As you've heard today, age 33, what is your greatest life accomplishment?
My greatest life accomplishment.
I thought this would be an easy one, Ashley. I thought, yeah, let's end on a high. This is a good.
I know it should be an easy one. I know. I that's why it's so challenging. I have a lot of things that I'm very, very thankful for. I feel like a lot of people probably expect me to say my daughter here in this situation. She is, my most favoriteest accomplishment. But I think my biggest accomplishment was my decision to choose me. And I make that decision every day. And so I look at every day as an accomplishment, truthfully.
Yeah, and Ashley, it's been a real honor and a privilege to talk to you today and to get to know you better. And through some very deep subjects, there's been some laughter as well. So I'm just so grateful. And I know that we're touching some very common subjects, like we started off in our conversation. It's my belief a lot of these ones that people want to push aside and either say it doesn't exist or they just choose not to have it in their life. But mental illness and everything you've gone through is very real with your addiction. So thank you very much for joining me today. But before we wrap up, just go through some of your websites and areas that people can get hold of you again.
Sure. Yeah. Everything can be found on freeyourghost.com. Has all of my social links on there and a link to the blog too, that you can continue and follow along my story.
Brilliant. So Ashley Kesner, thank you for joining me today.
Yes. Thank you so much, Simon. This is great.
Thank you for joining the Who I Became podcast. To help spread this inspiring story, be sure to share it with your friends, hit the like button, and of course subscribe to our channel so you won't miss out on any future episodes. We'd also love to hear how this story impacted you, so leave a comment on whatever platform you're watching us from. To learn more about this episode, our guests, or Simon, head over to the Simon Osimo /podcast and sign up to receive the latest information delivered straight to your inbox. Once again, thank you for joining us for the Who I Became podcast.